Hello, we're back. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's a few minutes after 10, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So, thank everyone on the webinar for joining us to learn more about our Greener Grounds program, manual workbook, and grants. And more importantly, to learn how you, as an event organizer, can incorporate some of the best practices to prevent litter and reduce waste at our outdoor events. And so I would like to go ahead and introduce um, my partner in crime today, and he is Andrew Woodford. He is the Director of Operations and Event Production for the French Quarter Fest, Inc. And he is going to be walking you all through this workbook and manual that we produced last year. And first, I'm going to give you a little background and tell you why we partnered and how we got started on this adventure. And so I'm going to pull up a few screens that's going to take us down that road. And so on your screen, you will see the covers of our Greener Grounds workbook and guidebook. And these are tools for you as event organizers. They are available free. If you want hard copies, we can send them to you, but you can also find them on our website and download them. And the, see if I can, the whole reason that we created these things is because, in Louisiana, we have over 300 fairs and festivals. We have parades and music concerts, and it really is what makes Louisiana unique. It's part of our culture, and it's a wonderful experience for our visitors and our tourists. Unfortunately, as we all know, these outdoor events produce large amounts of waste. And when that waste is mismanaged, it can become litter. And so, unfortunately, at the end of some of these events, there is a tremendous amount of litter left behind. But we see these as opportunities, right? Opportunities for us to partner with you to help you do better in that area, to teach how to incorporate recycling and waste management and litter prevention best practices. So the idea of this manual came about really last year. We did a comprehensive litter study. And part of that litter study was a public perception poll. And we asked folks that we polled, why do you litter at outdoor events? Why is there so much trash at outdoor events? And quite surprisingly, 74% said that it was because there were either no trash cans, the trash cans weren't close by, the trash cans were overflowing, which means that they weren't serviced properly. And so we saw that again as an opportunity. And so we took that data, and as many of y'all might know, we do offer a trash receptacle grant. But more than that, we said, let's provide a tool for our event organizers so that they can determine how many trash cans they need at their event and where's the proper place to place them and how to figure out a service schedule so that they're not overflowing. And according to this data, if we can help event organizers do that, we can eliminate 74% of litter. And so why is litter prevention and waste management such important pillars at outdoor events? We feel that it is the responsibility of the event producer. It's the right thing to do for the environment, and it helps to build that brand equity and community goodwill. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and he's going to dive deeper into the manual and the workbook and how these tools can help you. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, please enter them into the question and answer section. I'll be monitoring that, and I will ask the questions along the way. Andrew, it's your turn.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, just to introduce myself one more time, I'm Andrew Woodruff. I'm the Director of Operations Event Production for French Quarter Festivals, Inc. So we do the French Quarter Fest, but we also produce some other small events in New Orleans, so Satchmo Summerfest and Holiday New Orleans style. So, Susan, thanks for having me and being a partner in crime in this like multi-year endeavor that we've put together. And I'm going to review the guidebook, which is, a physical, it's both something that is physical, we have printed copies as well as it is online. And so everyone knows it's kind of a two-piece document. There's the guidebook, which we're going to get into today, that really goes through the thinking and the thought processes and everything else related to making these important decisions around waste. But there's also a workbook which is designed for you all to fill in kind of as we go. And so we're hoping that this workbook can kind of serve as a one-stop, centralized way of organizing your thoughts when it comes to waste management, and also communicating them to others. So with that said, I'm going to jump into the actual the meat of the book here. And we spent a lot in the early on. I remember having discussions with Susan about this time last year when we were developing the guide about what comes first. And I think it's really important that that the things that come on the front end are both kind of assessing where you're already at, and then getting everyone on your team and everyone that you'd be working with bought in. So we call that step one is event evaluation. That's kind of like who, what, where, when of your event, and all those kind of demographic and geographic factors. And then when we get to stakeholder engagement, that's really where I think the hard work begins. And really there you see this graphic at the bottom here of the slide that's currently up. We like to think of it as a series of circles, and basically you as the event producer, or you as the person that's pushing this, litter abatement or recycling, or better sanitation in general, you're kind of at the center, you're the core. Whether that's a team or that's an individual, the first layer that needs to be brought on if you want this to succeed is your direct internal stakeholders. So if you are a fair or a festival, that could be the board. If you're a nonprofit, that could be whatever your kind of governing body is, could be major sponsors potentially. Also for convention and visitors bureaus, this would probably be your executive team, perhaps city management, anyone that really has the decision-making power around what is or isn't included in your event plan. It's really important to get them on board from the beginning. And it's also not uncommon to have pushback, or to have things to address, and have to really sell people on some of these things, because new things are scary. It can be it can seem daunting to introduce recycling, to introduce waste at a level that you may fear will cost more, or require additional work from your team. There is work that needs to go into these practices, but the what you're going to get out of it is going to far exceed the work that is put in. And that is, you're going to have an event that is clean. You're going to have attendees that are impressed, right, by how clean your grounds are, and that's going to create buy-in with the attendees to want to keep it clean and not to litter. If they already see a ton of litter out there, it's you don't really think twice about littering. But if you do your work, you buy in your stakeholders internally, and you let it radiate out from there, hopefully in the final product, and it might take a couple years, but hopefully everyone attending your event understands the system, and they want to participate, and they want to be part of it. So that is kind of the furthest reach that stakeholder buy-in has, is the audience. And in between, there's your vendors, there's your suppliers. I would really advocate starting internally, then reaching out to people that you pay, because if you are paying someone, right, you have the power over them to dictate some of those terms. And so, it is, if you have a key vendor that you work with, like, for example, I work with, a vendor that does all of our bars and beverages, they are a huge operator on site. It's recycling or, even just proper disposal of waste is not something that was top of mind for them. And really it me as the festival producer to, say, we have made this decision internally. We are committed to this. This is not going away. Um, and so let's get you as the key vendor, let's get you on board and make it easier for you. Yes, it's going to be new, but let's work around it. So let's work through and around it so that we can integrate it into what you're already doing on the front end. And I think having these conversations ahead of time is really key. Um, if you're doing an event, things get hectic on the ground when, it's time to actually do the thing. And that's not the time to tell a very important vendor that you have a new way of moving waste or that you're going to be requiring them to, recycle their cruise water bottles or anything like that. You want to talk to those stakeholders, those vendors, those people you pay, those city leaders well ahead of time so that they can start kind of churning it over in their minds that things will be different. We don't want to surprise anyone if we don't have to. So stakeholder engagement, I think, is always something to come back to. It's always something that throughout the process, as things change, let's say you decide to do litter 1 year and then you really focus on litter, and then within, a few years, you decide to introduce recycling. You want to make sure that along the way, as those changes happen, you're revisiting those conversations every year if you're an annual event, or every month if you're a monthly event, and just checking in with people saying, hey, we introduced, more trash cans, or we introduced recycling, or we introduced, collecting, oyster shells for redemption, or whatever it is that you want to do. Making sure that those folks are plugged in along the way, and so that if as things change, they're updated and they feel a part of it. All this stakeholder engagement is about feeling ownership and feeling like a part of it, no matter what level you're on. If you're attending just to enjoy the event, or if you're producing the event, we want everyone to have some kind of sense of, this is my event and this is my responsibility to keep things clean.
Andrew, if I can jump in, this is Susan.
Sure.
I guess what it really boils down to is the expectation, right? The expectation that you have for your attendees, the expectation you have for your vendors, the expectation you have as a planning committee, and being able to succinctly communicate that and then recruit people to get that buy-in, right? So for French Quarter Fest Inc., y'all been doing this for a number of years and y'all do a lot of things really well. Can you share maybe an example of things that y'all did early on to get that stakeholder buy-in? Because I can imagine that it's not everybody's just jumping in with pom-poms and rah, 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 right? That there's probably some convincing that needs to take place there, especially early on before you can show the difference that it's made. So can you maybe comment a little bit on that?
Definitely. I'd say, and I love the word expectations, because I think often a lot of things that do end up being a problem once you're actually on site could be handled by adjusting expectations on the front end. And so, to start internally, we had French Quarter Fest. We've been going on for 40 years. This will be our 41st year in 2024. We introduced recycling in a very small scale in 2018. And so we had it, but it was kind of an extra thing that we just put out a couple bins where we could. We got some bins donated by a sponsor, and we did it. It didn't really impact how anyone operated on festival. It didn't really have any impact on the bottom line because it was a donated, the bins were donated. And so when we made the transition from that, actually the transition happened over COVID. When we returned in 2022 for our first large French Quarter Festival, there was in that interim, there was a lot of discussions that had to happen internally around budget, around and not only budget for that year, but going forward, like, what are we getting into? And I think there was a bit of fear sometimes in those regards, because it's not like we're adding a stage and that's going to bring in sponsorship dollars. This is something that, you know, even if you get a sponsor or a grant to cover it, it's not an additive financial thing usually. It's usually just you're creating an additive more quality experience for the guest, which is of course going to contribute to your bottom line and have everyone come back. So that was part of the discussion and talking to our financial team and our board is that yes, in our case, we were introducing recycling and compost, and that was a big jump because it tripled the size of my dumpster footprint. It tripled the size of the amount of waste, and it kind of made things a little bit more complicated. And um, from the from the financial side of things, you was basically able to address that by talking with everyone about, look, this is where things are moving in 5 years, this is going to maybe be more expected of a festival of our size in our region. This is already expected at festivals of our size in other regions. Let's think forward and let's future proof is the word. Let's try to do things that are going to not only benefit us over time with reducing waste, but also make it easier. Like we used to be using cardboard trash cans for everything. We, through a program very similar to the grant, the Greener Grounds grant, able to buy trash cans. Yes, we have to store them. Yes, we have to clean them. But ultimately, that is making our waste management a lot more streamlined. It's reducing the waste of all of those extra cans that were getting thrown out. It's reducing the cost of having to purchase those cans every single year when we provide them. And it's also giving a better experience to the guests, which then ultimately will kind of trickle back into our bottom line of it'll make someone from out of state or someone even locally want to come back and spend their money on our merchandise and our beverages because they had a good experience as in terms of course, music, of course, the programming inside, but sanitation. A lot of times people's experience when they go to an event is like, well, what were the bathrooms like? And was it a pleasant place to be? You can have the coolest acts on the stage, or you can have the most interesting topic at your convention. But if it's not physically comfortable, and sanitation has a big part to do with that. If it's not physically comfortable, that's going to be the takeaway, not all the great programming that you're putting in front of these people. So,
That's a good point, Andrew, because I remember several years ago, and some of y'all might remember this as well. There was a particular festival in New Orleans. Great festival. Everything you read about after the festival, unfortunately, was the large amounts of litter and trash and that was left behind, and how unsightly. And when you look
yeah,
at your, your brand, and you survive on that free publicity, right? And the positive word of mouth. And when the thing that can be remembered at the end of the day, to Andrew's point, is not how awesome the musicians were or the good time, but as you're walking to the car, when you go through, these
yeah.
fields littered, and you read about it in the paper the next day, and so
Hmm.
it's a case for, doing this, not because Keep Louisiana Beautiful or the French Quarter Fest says you should do it, but
Hmm.
it should be tied into the overall experience of contributing to your community, and not
Community.
taking from it, right? And so for that community engagement, for the public relations, but it's also the right thing to do for the environment as well. Um, I'm going to ask one more question, Andrew, and then I'm going to let you go on with the presentation. But for those that are like just wanting to start out, but are maybe concerned about getting the buy-in from the powers that be, right? Because to your point, at least for the first couple of years, they're struggling, that gets people on board because it involves change, right? Or it could
Yeah.
be perceived as just another expense, or another or more work, right? To either, have the additional receptacles and have them serviced properly, or maybe add recycling. And so I'm wondering if y'all ever did any kind of polling of your attendees prior to getting started to see if your attendees, would you like to see recycling at this event? What are some, to get some feedback so that you can use that information in making the case to your stakeholders?
That's a great question. I'm actually not, well, we do a survey every year on site where we survey festival goers, and we've been doing that for as long as I've been here. I'm not sure if in 2019, when we, like before this program, if we had a question about that. I do know that starting in 2022, once the program was introduced, we added questions. We added 3 questions to our survey specific about our Going Green program, and it was all about awareness. It was like, have you noticed, basically, have you noticed that we have a waste management program? Question 2 is, have you been engaged with anyone from our green team? Like you might see it, but then level 2 engagement, ideally, everyone is having like a face-to-face interaction with someone that can help them with where to put their waste. And then level 3, we ask, can you tell the difference between what should go in the composting, what could go in the recycling, what can go in the landfill? That's basically a quiz. And through that, we're able to see awareness. And what we found anecdotally is that the first 2 questions, yes, people generally are aware and they've had some interaction with the green team. But unfortunately, for the 3rd question, the quiz, a lot of people are not passing that still. And I think that just has to come to like, we have a long way to go with education. And, there's tweaks that I can do on site with signage and stuff I'm looking at to make it a little bit harder to do the wrong thing. But I think having a sense of the demand is huge. And so even though we did not, that I'm aware of, have a survey question before we introduced this program, I can say that it's been buzzing around the idea of it has been buzzing around this office for a decade. Like I was actually lucky enough to intern here when I was in college. I worked here part-time before I was full-time. So I've seen the organization grow. I've grown with it, and I've seen that come up. And it's not always from who you think. Sometimes it's, a city official that we're meeting with about a different issue, and they'll say, hey, are you guys thinking about recycling? Because we really need to, you would be a great example as French Quarter Fest to do that, and then, try to create more buy-in on the city side of things. And sometimes it's definitely from attendees. We heard from, just people emailing after the fact saying, love the festival, wish I could have recycled, wish there was, more places to put waste throughout the event. But if anyone here is, on step 1 or step 2 and starting this, I'd say get that. If you can go, do a survey or a poll. An online poll is a very easy thing to do. And collect that information. That will help with buy-in. There's one last example I have, Susan, which is when we transitioned all of our food vendors to compostable products, we did do a poll. Actually, for years prior, we did, remember now, saying, would you consider, a compostable product? What would that cost difference be? We did a poll with the food vendors. We then worked with the food vendors to figure out, okay, if you're switching from styrofoam to a compostable, what's that cost difference? And maybe we can help you with that through grant money. And that was essential for the buy-in on the food vendor side. And remember, those are, folks for us that if they don't have a good experience, we're going to hear about it. And, they might not come back. And so we want to have the best experience for everyone, but also have to, talk it through with some chefs that aren't, very enthusiastic about investing the additional money to make that change. And so you kind of have to try to be centered yourself and kind of see it from all the different angles, and how you can then relay that back to your internal team. I can talk to my CEO. Hey, I talked with someone from City Hall and they were asking about it. And hey, these food vendors are asking about it. And then we're getting these emails. Putting that all together and being able to say, and looking where the world is going and being able to say, this is important for us and we're going to put a stake in the ground to commit to this. And it doesn't mean we're committing to everything all at once. You got to grow with time, grow at your own pace. But that's why we're spending so much time talking about stakeholder buy-in. That commitment is so important if you're going to succeed.
That's right. And, this will lead us to our next slide, which talks about goal setting, because a lot of that data for those of y'all, to Andrew's point, that are just starting out, and you do have a way of collecting some of that data from your audience, either through an online poll, as he suggested, or even having
Mhm.
volunteers walk around with cards, even if it's just 3 questions, right? That's going to help you, not just with your stakeholder buy-in, but it's going to help you with your goal setting too. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull up the next slide. And,
Mhm.
and, you know, folks, as we go through this, it's important to note that in setting those goals, uh, a goal can't be too small. Everybody has to start somewhere, right, Andrew?
Don't get discouraged. If the goal is introducing waste management and litter management, then that's a huge goal. That's going from 0 to 100. Like, you're adding something that wasn't there before. If you already have, waste management, maybe then it's about a goal of having 0 litter on site and having enough receptacles that um, can just look out and just see how clean things are, and that's your goal. Maybe your goal is, okay, last year um, you know, we had 100 trash cans. This year we want to have 150. Maybe your goal is, we already have trash cans, we already have landfill, now let's add recycling. So there's many different, stepping stones, and also every event is not, and conference or convention is not created equal. So for a lot of Louisiana, doing commercial composting isn't even going to be an option because you don't have composting in your area. Maybe you are doing an event that, maybe you're a camping event where you've got people camping. That's going to be a totally different set of considerations in waste management than a 2 hour, um, event in the park where, you can set it up and kind of break it down all on the same day. What's feasible, what's realistic for those two events is going to be different. And of course, it's also going to be contingent on your budget. So the point that we, the three points that we ask that all goals fall under are: is it attainable? Meaning, even if it's long term, is this doable? Um, do we see a world where we can actually get to having recycling throughout the event, or having 0 litter on the ground for the whole time? And usually the answer for that is yes. Um, is it measurable? This is key, and something that, even since I made this guide, I'm learning more and more how important the data is, how important it is to have measurements of whatever it is you're tracking, whether that's your waste numbers, your volunteer numbers, your number of trash cans, pounds of waste. Having something, a baseline metric, to be able to then say, next year we want to improve by 20%, or we want to, double our footprint or whatever. Having that is essential, because if you don't have a baseline, you don't know where to start from. It's also very helpful in going back to your stakeholders and your vendors and being able to show them that this isn't like theoretical. We have numbers. We have where we are now and where we want to go, and that will, I think, reduce a lot of the fear on that end from certain stakeholders, seeing that you not only do you have, a plan, but you've got metrics that you're trying to hit, and then you've thought it out. The last thing is it achievable within budget? So let's say, for example, you decide that you want to introduce, aluminum recycling at your event, so that you can then collect the aluminum and redeem it and make a little extra money. That would be, is it attainable? Definitely. Is it measurable? If you do your work, it will be. Is it achievable within budget? What if you only have budget the first year to do 5 recycling stations, right? Ideally, your goal when you started this was to do all 20 of your waste stations to add recycling. But sometimes you do have to scale things for the budget. And maybe in year one, it's taking a baby step and just, implementing your system at 5 locations rather than all of the locations. That still is a great goal to have, because it's achievable you can have that sense of accomplishment. And then that way you also demoed it. So when you do scale up, you'll be able to make tweaks to make it better. I think enemy is the perfect, or what is it? Perfect is the enemy of the good is a great saying, because if you wait to get everything perfect before you do it, there's still going to be problems when you do it. The earlier that you can start to get comfortable with these things and start putting them out there and have realistic goals around them, the more success you'll have and the more sense of kind of building upon your accomplishments you'll have.
I think that's a good point, Andrew, that don't let this scare you off. Start somewhere, and it's
Yes.
okay to start small and build because you're going to learn. And depending on your event and where your event is located, you're going to have challenges that someone else might not
Mm-hmm.
have. And so it is a process. So if you approach it that way, right, it's a journey. Um, but we start somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And maybe starting, somewhere is starting in your backyard with a partner that, you know, is really excited about one aspect of things, and then that is a no-brainer. If you find someone that is, dedicated and really wants to do glass recycling, and you're not doing regular, let's say you just have trash cans, you're just doing all your waste goes into landfill, and you're not doing plastic or aluminum recycling. If someone approaches you and says, hey, I can collect your glass and then I can send that off and donate it so that it can be turned into, sandbags for coastal defense, don't say no to that just because it was in your initial plan. That in itself is a great thing that can contribute to a great, a better environment for all of us. And it's achievable.
And I think it's also important, Andrew, to note, know your community too, and know
Yeah.
what um, what your community offers and where those challenges are. So
Hmm.
many of you all are probably in communities that don't have recycling as an option. So you need to look into that. So before you set out to incorporate recycling, you all know at the end of the day, something has to happen with those materials, right? And so there's some logistics behind that. And so if it's determined that recycling is not going to be a viable option, at least currently, right? Then what are some other ways? Be creative. Sometimes we have to think out of the box. What are some other ways, if we can't incorporate recycling, that maybe we can reduce the amount of
Hmm.
waste that is generated at our event? And so one example might be, instead of selling single-use plastic water bottles, maybe it's decided that you bring in refillable water stations and you encourage people to either bring their own water bottle, or if that is a revenue source for your event, then consider having branded water bottles that you sell, and then they can refill unlimited. So again, there's no right and wrong. Y'all need to figure out what's going to work in your community for your event and what steps you're going to take. And sometimes that's going to require y'all being creative and stepping out of the box.
Well said. And that I'm thinking of like another example in those terms, like maybe your goal, or maybe it's not realistic, it's not achievable to hire a team of 20 people to go around and pick up waste after your event because this is a free community event that you're putting on. That's a time to then look at a different approach. Instead of having dollars get that done, let's look at volunteers and what we can do. What other organizations could we partner with? Hey, I'll volunteer for you if you volunteer for me, kind of thing. And those community connections will only, make your program stronger over time.
Sure. And a lot of high school students need community service hours. And if they can do this with partners and friends, or, I've even in the past when I've needed some big strong guys for some moving, make a donation to the football team or to the
Hmm.
ROTC at high school. And then they're, kind of guaranteed to show up and to serve a certain period of time. And so again, know your community, think outside of the box. All righty.
Do
Go
we
back.
want to keep going with the guidebook?
Or you want to touch a little bit on just maybe really quickly about how the guide will help you map out your site, and maybe we can go through some
Yeah.
slides a little quickly.
Yeah, so we don't have time to get into every detail in this webinar, but if download a copy of the guidebook and the workbook, it's going to walk you through step by step about the things that you need to consider. And so when it comes to on-site planning, you really need to establish a number of things. One, which is actually the step before this, is which waste streams you're going to select. So whether you're just going to do landfill, if you're going to try to recycle aluminum or plastic or glass or any of those things, you're going to want to start by kind of understanding the ecosystem within your region about what's possible within budget. And then once you've determined, okay, we're going to do, let's say, regular landfill, and we're going to also introduce just aluminum recycling at our event. Well, then you would have to go through the on-site planning, which is outlined here in these steps of where are these waste stations going to be placed? How many receptacles are needed at each waste station? Is this just one recycling can and one landfill can, or or is most of the waste that's being generated actually beer cans? So we want to add two recycling bins at that location and only one landfill because we're anticipating having more aluminum than we are of trash, or vice versa. If you're doing, if it's a crawfish festival, you got to think about, where that all those old shells and everything is going and how that's being handled, and where you'd want to put your trash cans relative to where the crawfish is being served. How many receptacles? Determine location for back of house disposal is step C. And that just means, where does the waste go once the trash can is full? So if you have a 2-hour event in the park and you bring out enough trash cans, you may just, be golden just having those trash cans fill up, and then at the end, having someone take them away on a truck. But more than likely, if you're doing a larger event outdoors, at least, you're going to probably want to employ a dumpster, a trash truck, or something to be able to aggregate that trash. And having a understanding of how you get from point A to point B, or how the person that's moving that trash gets there, is really essential, because that has a big impact on your cost for labor or volunteers. How much time it takes for them to do those movements. It's also a really important thing to keep in mind for the audience's understanding, or their experience rather. If there's a bunch of smelly dumpsters right next to the stage, that's not going to be a good look. You want to usually put your dumpsters, or wherever you're aggregating your waste, in an area that's back of house, we call. So it's somewhere that's behind a fence, behind a barricade. Doesn't necessarily need to be out of sight. It just needs to be in a place that the average attendee to your event couldn't walk up and just throw the wrong piece of waste into the wrong dumpster. It needs to be kind of secured. And then other things to consider: you need an area for your team, whether that's volunteers or that's paid labor, for them to, take a load off, especially in the summer and the spring, to get out of the sun. Do you want to introduce an education area, somewhere that the public can be informed about what you're doing? And if so, you're probably going to want to staff that with folks that are comfortable, in front of house, talking with the public and being in more of a customer service / volunteer role. And then you're going to look at, what are these waste stations made out of? Are we doing standard trash cans? Are we doing cardboard? Are we buying X frames, which are the X frames are getting more and more popular, I think, because you can see the waste underneath, which is really cool. So people have a little bit more sense of responsibility. If they're walking up to an X frame that's full of plastic already, they're less likely to put their food waste in there, because they can see that it clearly doesn't belong. The things that are going to really factor in with that is cost, what your how you're moving things between where the trash can is to the dumpster, and signage is also a big part of that. You want to make sure that it's very clear if you have more than one type of waste stream, how it all fits together. And that it's clear to the public what goes where. There's a lot more here. You know, we got into in the guidebook, we then get into signage, we get into some behavioral economics, meaning what little tweaks can you do with your signage or your placement of your cans to make people be more receptive to doing the right thing. One small anecdote I have is we used to have our trash can lids closed at French Quarter Fest. I'm sorry, no, we used to have them open. Now we keep them closed so that someone has to do the extra step of lifting it and putting it in. And hopefully that, because we've got recycling, compost, landfill next to each other. And often with us, the problem is someone just putting it in the wrong bin. Hopefully that extra step of them having to actually lift the bin gives them a little bit more of a trigger to do the right thing. Once you have figured out your footprint, where on the map you're going to have your trash cans or you know, recycling, if you have it, you can build out your team and really figure out, okay, what is the labor needed to move these things around. The rest of the guidebook talks about communications, marketing, and then we also get into some specifics around parades. Since parades, Mardi Gras, type things are very, you know, inherent to the culture here in Louisiana. We want to make sure that everyone is thinking about how to manage waste. If you don't have like a small footprint, but you've got a long footprint, that's a different consideration. And then finally in the guidebook, we get into when you're actually on the ground at the event, some stuff to look out for, what you should have. You should have schedules for your team if they're managing waste, maps, volunteer information, and a checklist also of everything that you want to be doing. You want to be checking to make sure that your waste is being handled properly through the event. You want to make sure that your teams are onboarded in the morning. You want to make sure there's a debrief at the end so that you can improve upon things as they come up. And then the last section here is just something I've heard a number of events ask me about. So it is something we include as our waste rate diversion template. So if you are interested in figuring out, okay, what amount of my waste is going to the landfill versus, you know, recycling, compost, donation, anything else, we have the formula right in there that you can copy and use yourself. So that's like the, you know, the breathless version of the guidebook, but happy to answer any questions about it.
Well, I tell you, it is, as y'all can tell, it is very extensive. Andrew and his team at French Quarter Fest Inc. did a marvelous job. And we thank them for all the hard work and time it took. To my knowledge, this is the only manual that exists like this. And again, this is here for you, right? For you to use for whatever your event looks like. And to, you know, Andrew mentioned that there's also a section in the back that addresses parades and road races, outdoor concerts. So anything. And if you know of others in your community that are event organizers, let them know about this. And again, it's on our website. You can download it, but it truly takes you through every single step from beginning, where you're going to evaluate your event, figure out what you're trying to do and accomplish, who you need on board, how you're going to do it, a site plan, a management plan, an evaluation, because the waste that is generated from the event or consumed at the event, it shouldn't be an afterthought, right? It should, just as you are planning every other aspect of your event, from who the talent will be and what banners need to be ordered and what, you know, companies you need to sponsor, all those logistics. And I've served on a festival committee for several years, and there's a lot of logistics. Don't forget that this needs to be part of the planning process. And that's what this workbook does, is it helps you to incorporate this into the planning process so it's not an afterthought. And it does need to be budgeted because there's expenses associated with it. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I'm going to move on to the grants program. So once we spent the better part of a year creating these tools. I said, we need to market it, get it out, right? We want to encourage people to use it and try to incentivize it. We realize that getting started, there's expenses associated with this. And we did not want that to be the main roadblock, right? And so we have created the Greener Grounds Grant, which will provide funding for some startup projects, all aimed to prevent litter, increase recycling, and reduce waste at your event. So I'm going to share the screen with you that's going to take you through. And again, just for the sake of time, I'm going to go through these really quickly and highlight the things that you need to know. Excuse me. So this grant cycle begins again on March 15th, and it will run for 2 months. It'll stay open. It will close on May 15th. The application is online and can be found on our website. And so this goes to show just highlights those folks that we have partnered with this year. I believe it's 41 grants that we were able to make, 25 that we were able to make for a total of like $141,000. There we go. So again, the grant is tied to, I'm sorry, I'm not used to this. The grant is tied to this workbook and guidebook. So it is a requirement that at the end of your grant cycle, in addition to your final report, that you also have to upload and submit the guidebook that shows that you and your planning committee went through the steps and filled it out. The grant tops up at $10,000 for events that attract 3,000 attendees or more, and offers up to $5,000 for events of 1,000 or more. So to be eligible, nonprofit event organizers, municipalities, and parishes. The event has to be held in Louisiana and outdoors. It must be open to all citizens to attend. You must have at least 1,000 people a day. The event should be held between August of 2024 and May of 2025. Applications for consideration must be submitted before May 5th of this year. That is when the deadline is for the grants. So what are we looking for? We are looking for efforts, activities that you are going to incorporate into your event that will reduce waste, increase recycling, and prevent litter. In your application, do a really good job at justifying how those budget items directly relate to the proposed projects that you are doing. Include an itemized listing. We don't want general. The more detail, the better it is. And then we want to see where the effort creates awareness, publicity, and education, and who those target audiences are. So you're trying to educate your attendees, or you're trying to educate your vendors, etc. Award notification. Once we review them, we will make awards by the end of July. There is a webinar that is required that will take place at the end of July. There's a cooperative endeavor agreement that you will be required to sign. And once it is signed, then you will be able to start your grant project. And so again, that is our website. And on that website is where you can find the manual as well as the workbook. Take a look at it and have a good understanding of what you're kind of getting yourself into before you apply, because we don't want you to apply and then we award you and then you open up the booklet for the first time and say, oh no, this is too much, right? It is a requirement. The grant cycle ends on May 31st, 2025. So you also need to keep in mind when your event takes place in the calendar year, and if you will have time before May 31st to complete the requirements of the grant and submit the request. It is a reimbursement grant, so it does require you to make all the purchases up front, save the receipts, and submit that for reimbursement. One of the other requirements is to send a letter to your representatives, letting them know that this is that you received this grant. The funding for this grant does come from out of the state budget for litter abatement. So it's important that we communicate to our legislators and to thank them for that support. We also ask that you send a press release. This way it generates some additional publicity for your event as well as the grants program. Use the logo and then register for Love the Boot Week. That is held in April of each year. And this year, if y'all are interested, it's April 20th through 28th. So be a part of that. We do require a 10% in-kind match or cash match. And then again, the final report is due on May 31st. And so here are some things that we will fund: bins, receptacles, banners, signage, education, but it has to be promotions. It has to be directly tied to litter prevention, recycling, waste reduction. T-shirts for only for those volunteers working the waste stations, food and water, only for those volunteers working the waste stations. We're pretty strict about that. Okay. What we will not fund. We will not fund the rental of dumpsters, roll-offs, large solid waste and recycling containers. We will not fund expenses related to servicing those containers. And we will not fund transporting or handling tipping fees associated with those waste, recycling, and compost. Those are expenses that you would have anyway, and y'all need to have some skin in the game, and that's the responsibility of the event organizer. So again, real quick, here's some timelines. Mark your calendar. If this is something that you think y'all would benefit from, please consider applying. And here's some contact information. So our grants manager is Jan Windhorst. If you have any questions specific about the grants program, please feel free to reach out to her. As mentioned earlier, I'm the executive director. I would love your feedback, comments. These tools, these resources, what we do is just to benefit y'all, to help y'all. And so I want to hear what works, what doesn't work, some ideas on how we can improve and do better. And then, of course, Andrew that y'all met with the French Quarter Fest. And as an event organizer, he can give you kind of like that boots on the ground. He's in there and he can, provide you with answers that I probably would not be able to. And so with that, I am going to conclude. I want to see if there's no questions in the question answer. So Andrew, I'm going to toss it back to you to see if there's any final thoughts or comments that you would like to leave our webinar attendees with.
I did see one question, which was just about, says if we are not hosting an event and just want to pick up trash on the road in areas that we provide pest control treatments. I'm not really sure about that, since my specialty is on events. I would probably kind of work it out with your local government and make sure you're doing things safely. I'm not sure also if that would be eligible for the grants. Probably not.
If it's not a large outdoor event, it would not qualify.
No.
Right.
But the ways to pick up waste is you get a bag and you get a trash picker and you make sure you're wearing something safe and you get out there and you start to do your part. And we do that at, volunteers at festivals. There's lots of bayou cleanups that happen that are kind of similar, or roadside cleanups. So I'd say kind of finding a different organization that maybe focuses around that, or another aspect of Keep Louisiana Beautiful. They have a lot of resources on their guide about litter abatement on roadways and in public areas. So that's probably your best bet, is to go to keeplouisianabeautiful.org.
Yep. And I would just encourage everyone on the call, please take a look at the workbook. If y'all would like a hard copy sent to you, please email me and we would be happy to send that to you. Also share this with others in your community. We're just trying to push it out and get everybody, taking small steps, right? Because, one step in front of the other. That's how we're going to accomplish this. Don't be deterred, overwhelmed. Start small, but start. That's the most important thing. And we are here to assist in any way. we can. And so, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us. I hope you found the webinar helpful, and reach out if we can provide any other information on how you can reduce waste and prevent litter at your outdoor event. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us today. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the partnership. Y'all have a
Thank
lovely
you.
day. Take care.